teaching 8th grade English. The standard I saw him teach was ELA 21 8.3, and that was internal and external conflict. When I was in here, they did a T-chart of internal and external conflict. What was the book?
The Sniper.
The Sniper.
Yeah.
It kind of gave me some little PTSD back from high school English class. Being a math person,
Yeah.
English is not my thing. So I learned a lot in your class. During that, can you tell me your individual student needs? What I noticed there were a bunch of EL kids. A bunch of them. So what some of the things that you did to help them?
Right. We have a large EL population at Collinsville High School. Like 70% of the school is Spanish speaking. So for my EL kids, obviously I want to find the story in Spanish. If they're able to read in Spanish. Luckily, being at Collinsville High School, you also have a lot of bilingual kids that can speak English and Spanish. So we always have them team up and work together and collaborate. And being able to speak Spanish with the kids also helps. Studying Spanish in college.
I was so impressed that you kind of switched back and forth, speaking English and a little Spanish, or I think it was Spanish. It may have been a little Spanglish.
Yeah, so I can read and write in Spanish, so I type out the instructions, what the assignment is in Spanish. I'm able to give it to the EL kids and they're able to read it. Anything that I don't pick up, my bilingual kids are able to help me. So that's how I'm able to accommodate for my EL kids, find the story in Spanish and helping bilingual students help the only Spanish speaking students.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What about some IEP kids? Do you have any?
I have a few IEP kids. I have a kid that has dyslexia really bad, so I find the text and give it to him. Rather than him reading from the book and reading the small text, I find something online, post it on Google Classroom. He reads it through a link where he's able to blow up the text and make it bigger, so he's able to,
I saw he had the decoder where it kind of highlights.
Yeah.
That's what was going on.
Yeah.
So during this lesson on the sniper with the conflict, what do you feel like went well?
Well, the kids working together, being able to identify the internal conflict more, because the external conflicts are easy for the kids to identify.
Right.
It's like a man versus man conflict. You know who the opponent is. It's the internal conflicts, what the kids struggle with. Internal conflict is what goes on inside the character's mind that they're fighting with or struggling with. Some of my EL kids have trouble identifying that. I mean, they're engaged in the story, so that's good. So the engagement's there. It's just being able to connect the dots with what we're looking for in the story. So, I mean, being able to identify the external conflicts, that was great. But then my EL kids and my bilingual kids working together and helping each other find the internal conflict, that ended up being probably the brightest part of the lesson at the end.
So when you pair those together, I know like for me in math, I do sometimes my light thinkers. Sometimes I do it by high level and high level.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes I do by high and low. How did you pick what to do?
Yeah, just like you do. Whenever we read a story, we get in groups of 3, and I don't obviously let the kids know, but you have you'll pair a kid, a high and thinking kid, a mid-level kid, maybe an EL kid or a special ed kid that's struggling, have them work collaboratively together when we look at response analysis in the text and we start answering questions and stuff. That way they're able to collaborate and help each other.
So is that group working well for you?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So what else is working besides your groups?
Besides the groups, implementing any kind of technology is also very useful.
I was about to ask your Kahoot. They seemed very into that.
Before we start reading the text, I always do like a warm-up, fun engagement activity. Like again, we're trying to decipher what are internal conflicts, what are external conflicts. So we'll get a Kahoot up, and one of my favorite Kahoots that I have saved is like questions from like Disney movies. Like you get like The Lion King, Little Mermaid, Disney movies that they're familiar with. and have watched over and over and over, like every kid's watched The Lion King just about.
Mhm.
So the Kahoot will ask them questions like, what's an internal conflict here in this scene, or what's an external conflict the characters are facing in that scene, and they battle it out. Sometimes we do independent, where they're going against everybody in all the class, and sometimes we split up into teams.
The team Kahoots,
And
yes.
the team Kahoots can get pretty violent,
Absolutely.
screaming back and forth at each other. Also, another thing that works really good, and also implementing technology, is vocabulary.com, because obviously in English class you have vocabulary words that go with each story. So before we start reading a story, we want to make sure we have an understanding of what the vocabulary words are and what they mean. So kind of like Kahoot, we get on vocabulary.com and we get in the teams, and we'll battle it out to see who can guess, the correct vocabulary terms.
That's awesome. What about, how do you know what you're doing is working?
Oh,
I mean, I know with your Kahoots, you have your formative. Is there anything else that you're looking at that kind of drives how much you need to spend, or what you're doing with internal and external conflict?
What we need to work on, is that?
But yes,
Oh,
so I'm
yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, like having them, they can identify the conflict, but whenever, explaining it, like, how do you know that's the conflict?
Uh-huh.
They get tongue twisted, or they are not able to explain it.
Right.
Which, what does explain mean up there? Tell me about it.
Tell
It's
me
one
why.
of our powerful Panther
Powerful
words.
Panther words.
Tell me why, and
Yes.
that's something they struggle with, being able to verbally, out loud in front of people, explain it.
Okay.
Sure, they might be able to write it, but that's something we need to break the ice on, is being able to speak it.
So is internal and external conflict on so these are 8th graders, so they take the ACAP. Do you know how they've done on that, since that is how, like that's the state test for it?
Yeah, so the question, how have we improved?
No, like,
Or,
well, how did they do last year?
like you said, we ranked third
It
in
was
the county.
3rd in the county, yes, okay.
So obviously we want to be first.
Of course,
So,
yes.
Compared to test scores like 4 or 5 years ago, we've improved a little bit.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we're still focusing on working on that every day. How are you seeing if students are mastering these skills? Just kind of to master, that way we're number 1 in the county instead of 3rd now.
Yeah. So I don't just teach it with one lesson and then call
Right.
it quits. So what I do is I build upon each story we read. So the first story we read in the unit is, identifying conflict. And then the next story, the focus might be like plot or foreshadow, another literary device. But I still take what we learned in past lessons and implement it into the next lessons. So like the next story we read was The Interlopers. Right? We're not talking about internal or external conflict in the interlopers. We're talking about plot. But within the plot, you have to have conflict, because if you don't have conflict, you don't have a good plot.
Right.
So it all builds upon each other. So we take what we learned from the previous lesson and implement it in the next lesson. It all builds upon each other, so they have a clear understanding of internal and external conflict, along with the other literary devices that we're learning throughout the unit.
That was absolutely awesome. Well, I enjoyed watching your lesson. I learned a lot about internal and external conflict, so thank you.
Mm-hmm.